I am doing just fine. Thank you for asking. Like everybody, I am craving normalization. And like most people should be, I am in a great deal of gratitude for the fact that this is most certainly not affecting me or my ilk the way that it is affecting a lot of other people. So the moment in which we find ourselves is one that is unfortunately doing the most damage to the people probably least prepared to incur such damage. And I'm grateful for where I am, even though at the same time, I certainly am looking forward to a resumption of normalcy. In my case, I really have to separate the professional impact into two phases because the month of March was just categorically different than everything since, because for a living, I run a wealth management firm that oversees over $2.5 billion on behalf of 300 individuals and families. And so in the moment of COVID's sort of peak, I think awareness month that we realized there was a significant amount of community spread going on. There was a lot of uncertainty as to what the fatality exposure could end up being. And of course, then we ended up going into, in the middle of that month, the sort of national lockdown. The professional impact to me at that point was obviously very intertwined with what was taking place in markets. And so there were, I get paid for a living to take on the anxiety of clients, and their anxiety was at peak levels. And so therefore mine needed to be. And I got through that just fine. It was a difficult period, but I felt proud of myself and my colleagues. At the end of the month, I felt that we had done our job to steward client affairs responsibly and prudently. And so that was the professional impact there, was kind of a crisis mode. Then you sort of get past that level of like the building's on fire, and then you have the aftermath and the uncertainty as to how long that lockdown was going to last. I live a bi-coastal life. My family and I go back and forth between our New York location and our Southern California location. And you had obviously travel impacted and questions as to what schools were going to be open and not open. And so, but that's something that was affecting everybody, not just me and my family. So that uncertainty in phase two was one frustration, and the high anxiety in phase one was the other. But I do believe through it all, the imperfect levels of patience that God blessed me with proved to be sufficient. Really good question. And the answer is yes. There definitely were leadership lessons. And I think I would apply them into different silos. In my own case, I do believe that there are times in which a leader has to be not just bold, but also potentially unpopular. I think some of the things that are lacking right now in leadership in the business community are the boldness that comes, the lack of boldness that comes from fear of unpopularity. We have a desperate need right now for our society to reopen, for businesses to reopen, to bring their employees back to work. And what's holding people back, I think, is impaired leadership. Strong leadership that's willing to be courageous, willing to be thorough, willing to be competent, willing to be sacrificial, and yet at the same time take bold steps without fear of how they're going to be perceived. And I feel that I've learned a lot about that through this period. Feel that moment of crisis, and this particular moment is a great example where a lot of what was at the heart of the crisis was the uncertainty as to where it was going to go. And you think back to, like, I use 9/11 as an example because 9/11 and COVID are kind of the bookends right now of the first 20 years of this new century. And at the very beginning of the century, when we went through 9/11 experience, there was a certain amount of uncertainty after that fateful day of attack as to whether or not there'd be another one. But the bulk of the pain and the challenge had taken place in that moment. And we were dealing with how to cope with that moment, that event that almost instantly became backward looking. Where in this moment, much of the anxiety and the pain and the difficulties have not so much been about the present, or let alone the past, but sort of the uncertainty into the future. And I cannot imagine one being able to prudently, diligently get through that level of uncertainty without a faith that produces a hopeful and rational optimism. I am a naturally optimistic person, but that optimism that I have is rooted in a very theological understanding of history and a very spiritual understanding of the future. And at the root of my faith and my profession in Christ are two event-oriented understandings: the victory that's been obtained at the resurrection and the hope we have into the future reunification with Christ. COVID, 9/11, financial crisis, all sorts of pain and destitution that comes along the way. All of those things I am able to translate by God's grace in the context of hopeful faith. And that was really, I believe, at the heart of this process through this COVID moment.